We've spoken to a great many people over the course of this past year on various different occasions and various different stories, but none really has been as dominant as, of course, the whole lockdown, coronavirus, COVID scenario. We've done two head-to-head debates as well, which we put out on YouTube. The first was Peter Hitchens and Dan Hodges, and then we did Toby Young and Christopher Snowdon. Christopher joins us now. He's head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Christopher, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
So here we are, a year on, and I was just talking to a caller before the news there who said we're just feeling very beaten down. And this is a guy, Felix, that's been talking to us for quite a long time. People are starting to feel exhausted by all this, aren't they?
Well, yeah, it's been a year, of which about 7 months has been in full lockdown. And we've got, depends how you define lockdown, but in my view, we've got 2 months left. It's 2 months before the pubs and restaurants can open indoors. And I just think that's probably too long now. I mean, I do believe in looking at the data, not the dates. And I don't think the government has done that. If the government's plan had been from day one, look, by the time we've vaccinated 15 million people, we'll do this. By the time we've vaccinated 25 million people, we'll do this. Yeah. And if the vaccines are this effective, we'll do this. But it was none of that. It was just these dates with this kind of carrot dangled at us that, these dates are flexible because we're going to look at the data. And then very quickly it turned out that actually they can only move back. It's a one-way ratchet.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? And they were very careful, I suppose, to choose those words, not before May the 17th, not before April the 12th, because you guys at the IEA are calling for a bringing forward, if you like, of the opening up of stuff. I'm assuming that refers to what they wanted to do in May rather than in April.
Yeah, it's not in the IEA line, but my suggestion is that let's really look at the data here. Let's look at the hospitalizations data. We're down below 300 a day now in England, which funnily enough is what I suggested should be the kind of benchmark back in February for this. Hospitalizations obviously is the most important thing. Cases are important. We do want to get cases down, and naturally deaths are going to follow if those two go down. But that's the kind of evidence we need to be looking at. I'm not really sure what a further 2 months is going to achieve. It seems to me we all accept massive cost of lockdown. Some of us accept the benefits of lockdown, other people don't. I do. I still think we were right, absolutely, to lock down in January, but I always acknowledge there were enormous costs to it. We've gone through, 2.5 months of this lockdown. I'm not convinced that another 2 months is really going to bring us much more than diminishing returns. So I think, touch wood, I'm not saying we should be in any way reckless, but if in the next week or two, if by Easter, basically, things are still moving in the right direction, cases haven't got that much further to fall, and hospitalizations are very low, I don't see any real reason not to move forward the stuff that's meant to happen in May, things like opening restaurants and pubs indoors, move that forward to the middle of April. I don't think that is a massive ask, actually. That is still a 3.5 month lockdown. That's still the same length as the initial lockdown last year when we didn't have any vaccinations and we didn't really know what we were doing.
But that's the thing. We know so much more. We do have the vaccine. It's not the same as last year. And I can't believe those people who still make the comparison that, oh, look what happened last year. When actually it's not really true what they say anyway, because I know you and I slightly differ on some of this stuff. But when they opened the pubs in July last year, there was no real problem at all until people started going back to school. Kids are now back at school, and we don't appear to be seeing the same kind of, spiking of testing. I mean, I'm looking at a figure from last year. 4,301,925 people in the past year had a positive COVID test. And if you think about that in terms of the numbers of people who have died, the numbers of people who have died out of that is a very small percentage. I mean, it's around 1.5%, I think. So you're talking about a disease still which affects quite a small number of people. I know it sounds like a big number, but it's really not, is it?
Especially below the age of 50. And we are very much on track for getting all the over 50s vaccinated by Easter and all the priority groups. And if you look at the number of people who died from COVID over the course of the last year, the number who are below the age of 50 and didn't have an underlying health condition, which would put them to the front of the queue for the vaccinations, is incredibly small.
Yeah.
Everyone a tragedy, obviously, but it's not the kind of thing that would make you bring the country to a standstill. And if we were starting from this point now, we wouldn't go into lockdown with the statistics we've got. I mean, this is about driving things down. We do want to make sure that we don't get a new variant spring up. And it is quite possible that you will have an epidemic amongst the under 50s. Don't get me wrong. We need to be cautious about this, and we need to open things up in a sensible way with social distancing and ventilation in particular, because we could have an epidemic. Most people under the age of 50 clearly aren't vaccinated. So there's nothing to be complacent about.
But on the other hand, Christopher, the government have clearly stated that those under 50 are not a priority for vaccination, because they've already said they want to now give priority to people over 50 to get the second jab before they start giving the first one to people under 50. So by their own admission, they must mean that they don't think that people under 50 are in very much danger.
No, and they're not. I mean, what worries Sage, and you can see this in the modelling from Imperial and Warwick, what worries them is that younger people are going to go crazy, spread the virus, and that is inevitably going to be passed on to people of an older age group and people who are more vulnerable. And not all of them are immune, because the vaccine doesn't provide 100% immunity. The second jab brings us, I think, very close to 100% immunity from hospitalization, from severe symptoms, and from death, which of course is the main thing.
Right.
But, for me, this entire year, and it is a year now, has been about stopping the NHS being overwhelmed. I just don't see how the NHS is going to be overwhelmed, even if you have a large number of infections amongst the under 50s, particularly when these other age groups, the older age groups, have had the second jab. I think the government is right to prioritize the second jab. You don't want to be waiting more than 12 weeks for this. Anyway, we've got enough vaccine, I gather, to give all the people who need it their second jab. But I don't think we should be worrying too much about the under 50s. That was never an argument made, even by the most most eager lockdown proponent back in January. There were people saying we should vaccinate the over 70s and then get back to normal. There were some people who said we need to vaccinate the over 50s and then get back to normal. I don't remember anybody saying we should vaccinate every adult before we can get back to normal.
But that's now what they're saying. And they're also now saying, what about the third wave? Because obviously we're seeing, I was looking at the vaccination chart. Germany still has only vaccinated less than 10% of its population. It's not a surprise that they've got a third wave. We, on the other hand, are not going to be subjected to that third wave, surely. So surely the government shouldn't be using that as another stick to beat us with.
I think that's broadly right. I mean, certainly there has been this big rise in a lot of European countries, which shows that the risk does remain. We shouldn't certainly be importing, the virus from the rest of Europe. I think our travel restrictions should prevent that happening. But we could still have a wave in the way I describe, in that lots of people can be meeting up with one another under the age of 50. Some of them, of course, still have the virus, and it can spread. We've seen in Europe over the last month or so how quickly it can spread. We saw in Ireland back in January incredible spikes you can get if you drop your guard with this. So we don't want to be complacent about it. The question is it, even in that kind of worst case scenario of a third wave, is that going to lead to the NHS having to refuse care to people? Is it going to lead to 1,000 deaths a day? The modeling, or the old modeling, I think it might have been overtaken by more realistic modeling now, but the modeling that the government based its roadmap on suggested there would be over 1,000 deaths a day in the middle of summer. Now, this doesn't pass the smell test to the armchair epidemiologist such as myself. We had 8 deaths a day on average back in August with relatively few restrictions. So I think the government's been misled by this modeling, and then it's introduced this totally arbitrary rule that says that we can't do anything. We have to wait for 5 weeks every time. Right. There has to be this 5-week gap between things, because it takes 4 weeks for us to understand the data and look at the data, and then it takes another week to act on it. Well, this is just a lie. This is just a fabrication designed to slow things down. Yes. The government never waited 5 weeks last year to start introducing tier systems and lockdowns and all sorts of curfews and all sorts of things, and we don't need it now. It does not take 5 weeks to work out whether allowing people to meet outdoors.
And frankly, with the figures that we currently have, which are, I'm told, similar to what we were in September, it wouldn't even be going into tier 2, would it?
No, I mean, if you look at the figures for the majority of the country at the moment, most people would be living in tier 1 now. I don't think anybody would be living in tier 3. I think it's a shame, actually, the government abandoned this kind of tier system. I think now, actually, would be quite a sensible time to have it. We have still got places that got quite high infection rates, places like Bradford, I think, Leicester, I think, still has a high rate.
And yet Leicester, I mean, let's talk about Leicester, because Leicester's been one of those places that's been practically in a full lockdown since about, May of last year, and it's still got one of the highest rates. So how do you figure that?
Lockdown fatigue, I think, has to be the explanation there. I mean, it's kind of the same in the Czech Republic, or Czechia, as we have to call it now. I've got a friend who lives over there, and I was asking him. Sorry?
Where's Czechia come from?
I don't know. They seem to prefer it to the Czech Republic.
Really?
But anyway, whatever you call it, they've had massive spikes and they've had a lot of restrictions. And a friend of mine who lives over there says, look, people can't afford, to be locked down the whole time. So people are just breaking the rules.
Right.
So you see this problem in places when you've got a lockdown for particularly a prolonged period of time, people just can't abide by it. And even if they can afford, financially to abide by it, they just get sick of it. So what you end up with, and I think this is an important point in regards to what we're discussing here, is you end up with people just meeting up in each other's homes.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, and after next Monday, once people are allowed to meet up in gardens, people have that kind of carte blanche to be going to people's homes, right? And you can say, well, I'm going to sit in the garden. You might go in the garden. If it starts raining,
what are
if
you
it's a
do?
bit chilly, you're going to go indoors.
Exactly.
And there's nothing anybody can do about it. I think it would be better to encourage people to be going into, a more regulated environment, if you like, a pub or a bar or a restaurant.
Yeah.
Because the reality is people will be getting increasingly sick of it. People can see what the data says, even if the government is not going to acknowledge it. And they will be meeting in each other's homes. And we know that that's the main place where the virus spreads.
Exactly right. Perfect sense, Christopher. Thank you very much indeed. Christopher Snowdon, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs, saying that, it really is time to move into what I think, as Christopher says, would be a more sensible way of unlocking. If it isn't for the whole country, then do it piecemeal. Do it in a tier system. But for God's sake, we are not in the same place we were in January. We're certainly not in the same place we were in last March. So let's get on with it.